The early morning hours in San Luis Obispo often pass without notice, especially in a college town settling into the quiet after a long holiday weekend. Memorial Day weekend in 1996 had brought a familiar rhythm to California Polytechnic State University. Classes were ending. Some students were preparing to leave town. Others stayed, drawn by parties, gatherings, and the brief pause before summer began. San Luis Obispo was not a large city, and Cal Poly's campus was woven closely into the surrounding neighborhoods. Students moved easily between off-campus houses and residence halls, following routes they knew well, even late at night. Kristin Smart was 19 years old that weekend. She was a first-year student at Cal Poly, living in student housing and moving through the same routines as thousands of others her age. On the night of May 24th into the early morning of May 25th, she attended an off-campus party. There was nothing remarkable about that decision. Parties were common during holiday weekends, and many students moved between them without incident. As the night turned into early morning, the party began to thin out. People left in small groups or pairs. Some walked. Some found rides. Witnesses later said Kristin appeared intoxicated. Because of that, she did not walk alone at first. She was assisted as she began heading back toward campus. This is the moment the case would return to again and again. The last confirmed moment. Kristin left the party around 2 o'clock in the morning. Several people were present during portions of her walk. Over time, investigators pieced together that Paul Flores, another Cal Poly student, was with her during the final stretch. Others separated from the group along the way. That final portion of the walk was short. It was familiar. It was a path students used regularly, even at night. There are no confirmed sightings of Kristin after that walk. There are no verified phone calls, messages, or interactions placing her anywhere else. She did not arrive at her dormitory. Her personal belongings remained behind. By the standards of missing person cases, the window of disappearance was narrow and clearly defined. That narrow window is what gives the case its quiet weight. In many disappearances, uncertainty spreads outward across miles or days. Here, it collapses inward. A short walk. A matter of minutes. A familiar route that should have ended safely. Instead, it ended with absence. When morning came, Kristin did not appear. Friends noticed. Plans went unanswered. At first, there was hesitation to assume the worst. College students miss mornings. They stay elsewhere. They sleep late. But as the hours passed, concern grew. By the end of the day, it was clear that something was wrong. A missing person report was filed. Law enforcement became involved. From the beginning, the investigation centered on that final walk and the people who were present during it. Paul Flores was identified early as the last person known to be with Kristin. This fact did not come from speculation, but from witness statements and interviews conducted in the days after she vanished. The environment in which this occurred matters. San Luis Obispo was considered a relatively safe community. Cal Poly's campus was not known for violent crime. The idea that someone could disappear during a short walk between a party and a residence hall unsettled students and parents alike. It challenged assumptions about familiarity and safety. There was no dramatic scene to mark the disappearance. No confirmed struggle. No witnesses reporting violence. No clear location where something went wrong. Instead, there was a sudden absence in a place where presence was expected. That absence is what carried forward. In the days that followed, search efforts focused on the campus and nearby areas. Friends retraced routes. Investigators canvassed neighborhoods. The question remained tightly focused. What happened between the party and the dorm? Where did the walk end? As hours turned into days and days into weeks, the simplicity of the last confirmed moment became more unsettling rather than reassuring. There was no evidence that Kristin had planned to leave. No indication she had met someone else. No confirmed movement beyond the route she was already on. The walk itself became the quiet center of the case. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. It represented an expectation shared by everyone who heard the story, that she would arrive, that the night would end uneventfully, that the routine would hold. It did not. Over time, the case would stretch across decades. Investigative strategies would change. Technology would advance. Legal proceedings would eventually follow. But none of that altered the importance of the first hours or the final walk that defined them. This story begins not with discovery or resolution, but with interruption. A routine night that stopped short, a path that did not reach its end. And from that moment, everything that followed unfolded around what was missing. Life at California Polytechnic State University in the mid-1990s followed a steady and predictable rhythm, shaped by classes, campus routines, and the quiet confidence of a town built around a university. Kristin Smart arrived at Cal Poly as many first-year students did, carrying expectations shaped by family support and personal ambition. She was 19 years old, enrolled as a student, and living in campus housing. Her days were structured around classes, social connections, and the ordinary responsibilities of college life. There is no public record of turmoil or crisis in the period leading up to her disappearance. By all verified accounts, her life was proceeding in a familiar and stable way. Kristin's background did not set her apart in ways that suggested vulnerability, beyond what is typical for a young college student. She had grown up in California and remained close to her family. When she left home to attend Cal Poly, she did so with the expectation of returning, visiting, and continuing a relationship built on regular contact. That expectation became significant only later, when communication stopped. On campus, Kristin moved through shared spaces that were designed to feel communal and safe. Residence halls, walkways, and gathering areas were active during the day and quieter at night, but still familiar to those who lived there. Students often walked between off-campus houses and dormitories, especially on weekends. These routes were not isolated in the way remote roads are isolated. They were part of a lived environment shaped by repetition and routine. Kristin's social life reflected that environment. Like many students, she attended gatherings, spent time with friends, and participated in the informal social structure that defines early college years. Memorial Day weekend was one of those periods when routines loosened slightly. Classes were ending, stress was easing, and students allowed themselves a brief sense of pause. Parties during that weekend were not unusual, and attendance carried no special meaning. There is no indication that Kristin anticipated danger that weekend. No report suggests she planned to leave campus permanently or to break from her normal patterns. She did not make arrangements that would indicate a departure. She did not pack belongings. She did not inform family or friends of any intention to change her plans. These absences of action matter because they frame the disappearance as an interruption rather than a decision. Her family's understanding of her life at that time came from regular contact. Kristin was known to stay in touch. When she did not return to her dorm and did not communicate, the concern that followed was grounded in this established pattern. Silence itself became a signal. Kristin's presence on campus was part of a broader social fabric. She was one student among many, moving through shared experiences and shared spaces. That context explains why her disappearance affected more than her immediate circle. It unsettled assumptions held by students, parents, and faculty alike. If someone could vanish under these circumstances, the sense of safety attached to routine movement was called into question. It is important to understand Kristin's life without projecting forward from what later happened. She was not living in anticipation of danger. She was not isolated. She was not withdrawing. The facts available paint a picture of normal engagement rather than distress. This matters because it limits interpretation. The case does not begin with warning signs. It begins with normalcy. In the days before her disappearance, Kristin followed her usual routines. She attended classes. She interacted with friends. She lived in student housing. Memorial Day weekend did not interrupt these patterns so much as pause them. Students remained on or near campus, taking advantage of the break. Kristin did the same. The party she attended was not an outlier in her social life. It was one of many gatherings typical of college weekends. There is no evidence that she attended with unusual intent or that she behaved differently than expected. Alcohol was present, as it often was at such gatherings, but there is no indication that the night was marked by conflict or escalation before she left. Understanding Kristin's life in this way grounds the narrative. It prevents the story from drifting into speculation or symbolic interpretation. Her disappearance was not the culmination of a visible downward path. It was a sudden break in continuity. When her family began searching for answers, they did so with this understanding in mind. Kristin had plans, she had connections, she had reasons to return. Those facts guided their response and sustained their involvement over the years that followed. As the case stretched on, Kristin's life before the disappearance remained a point of reference. Media coverage often returned to descriptions of her as a student, a daughter, and a young woman with an expected future. These descriptions were not embellishments. They were reminders of what was interrupted. The narrative of her life does not require dramatic detail to carry weight. Its power lies in its ordinariness: college, friends, weekends, familiar routes. A routine that did not prepare anyone for what came next. That ordinariness makes the disappearance more difficult to absorb. It leaves fewer explanations available. There was no visible fracture before the event, no signal pointing toward risk. Only the absence that followed. Kristin Smart's life before her disappearance provides the contrast necessary to understand the case. It shows what was present before something went missing. It establishes the baseline from which everything else deviated. The case does not ask why she made a certain choice or followed a certain path. It asks what interrupted a path that was already set. A life moving forward and then stopping. The night Kristin Smart disappeared unfolded quietly, without any confirmed moment of disruption, and that quiet is what makes the timeline both clear and difficult to resolve. Memorial Day weekend had shifted the usual pace of campus life. Many students remained in San Luis Obispo, using the break as a time to relax after exams. On the evening of May 24th, Kristin attended an off-campus party. This fact is established through witness statements collected in the days after she went missing. The gathering itself was not unusual. Parties like this were common during holiday weekends, and there is no verified indication that anything out of the ordinary occurred while Kristin was there. As the night progressed, alcohol was present, and by the time people began to leave, Kristin appeared intoxicated. This observation came from individuals who saw her near the end of the evening. Because of her condition, she was not walking entirely on her own at first. Other students assisted her as she began heading back toward campus. The route from the party to Kristin's residence hall was familiar to students. It was not a long distance, and it did not require traveling through remote or unfamiliar terrain. Students routinely walked between off-campus houses and campus housing, even late at night. This routine nature is a key part of the case. It establishes that the walk itself did not carry an obvious risk based on location alone. Witness accounts indicate that several people were present during different portions of the walk. As is common in group departures, people separated gradually. Some continued in one direction, others turned off toward different destinations. Over time, investigators reconstructed this sequence through interviews. What remains consistent across accounts is that Paul Flores was with Kristin during the final portion of the walk. This point became central to the investigation. Flores was identified as the last person known to be with her. There are no confirmed sightings of Kristin after this point. The timing is narrow. Kristin left the party around 2 o'clock in the morning on May 25th. The walk that followed would have taken minutes. Investigators were never able to establish a confirmed arrival at her dormitory. No one reported seeing her enter the building. No record placed her inside afterward. When morning came, Kristin did not appear where she was expected. She did not attend scheduled activities. Friends noticed her absence. At first, there was hesitation to assume she was missing. College students sometimes stay elsewhere overnight. They oversleep, they change plans without notice. But as the day progressed and no contact was made, concern increased. Kristin's personal belongings remained behind. This included items she would normally have with her. There was no evidence she had packed or prepared to leave campus. This absence of preparation reinforced the conclusion that she had not planned to go anywhere beyond the short walk she was already on. The timeline investigators faced was both precise and incomplete. They could identify when Kristin left the party. They could identify who was with her during the final stretch, but they could not identify what happened next. There was no confirmed location where something went wrong. There was no clear point of interruption visible in the record. This lack of a visible break is part of what defines the case. Many investigations hinge on a moment where events clearly diverge. Here, the divergence is implied rather than observed. The expected outcome of the walk never occurred, but there is no verified marker showing why. As law enforcement began interviewing witnesses, the focus remained tightly on this window of time. Statements were compared. Small differences were noted, but they did not change the central structure of the timeline. Kristin left the party. She walked toward campus. Paul Flores was with her at the end of that walk. She was not seen again. Investigators did not have evidence of a struggle. There were no confirmed reports of an argument or confrontation during the walk. This absence limited the immediate direction of the investigation. Without a scene or physical evidence, the case relied heavily on witness recollection. The environment itself contributed to the difficulty. Late-night hours reduced the number of observers. Familiar routes encourage a sense of safety that lowers vigilance. These factors do not explain what happened, but they help explain why there were no additional witnesses. The unanswered time gap became the defining feature of the case. It was not measured in days or hours, but in minutes. That gap carried disproportionate weight because it sat between two known points, a party and a dorm. Presence and absence. As days passed, investigators continued to return to the night of the disappearance. They retraced routes. They examined possible deviations. They sought confirmation of sightings beyond the final walk. None emerged. The simplicity of the timeline made it resistant to expansion. There were no additional movements to analyze. No alternate destinations to consider. The narrative did not branch outward. It narrowed inward. Kristin's disappearance did not occur during travel or transition between cities. It did not involve long distances or complex logistics. It occurred within a small area, during a short span of time, under circumstances that were routine for many students. This reality stripped the case of common explanations and left investigators with fewer options. The last confirmed sighting became more than a factual marker. It became the anchor point around which every theory would turn. Any explanation had to account for what happened after that moment and why it left no visible trace. The walk home, which should have ended without note, became the most scrutinized element of the case. Not because it revealed answers, but because it refused to. As the investigation moved forward, the night of May 24th and the early hours of May 25th remained fixed in place. Other chapters would be added over the years, but none would replace this one. It was the point where normal life paused and never resumed. Even decades later, the timeline of that night remains unchanged. The facts have not shifted. Kristin attended a party. She left around 2 in the morning. She walked toward campus with others. Paul Flores was with her during the final stretch. She did not arrive at her dorm. She was never seen again. Everything that followed began there. When Kristin Smart did not return to her residence hall, the first responses unfolded quietly, shaped by routine assumptions and the limited information available in the early hours. On the morning of May 25th, friends noticed that Kristin was not where she was expected to be. At first, this absence did not immediately trigger alarm. College students often stay overnight with friends or miss scheduled activities. That possibility lingered through the early part of the day. As hours passed and no contact was made, concern increased. By the end of the day, it became clear that Kristin's absence was not following her normal pattern. A missing person report was filed, bringing law enforcement into the situation. The initial scope of the investigation reflected the uncertainty of the moment. Officers worked with the assumption that Kristin had last been seen walking toward campus in the early morning hours. The focus was local and immediate. Searches centered on campus grounds and nearby areas where a student might reasonably have gone. Law enforcement began interviewing people who had seen Kristin the night before. These interviews were critical in establishing the basic timeline that would guide the case. Party attendees were asked about her condition, her movements, and who was with her as the evening ended. Through these conversations, investigators confirmed that Kristin had left the party around 2:00 in the morning and that she appeared intoxicated. Witnesses described assisting her as she walked toward campus. Over time, these statements helped narrow the final stretch of her movements. Paul Flores was identified early in the process as the last person known to be with her. This fact did not emerge suddenly or dramatically. It came from piecing together overlapping accounts from different individuals. The environment in which investigators were working mattered. The area between the party location and campus was not remote. It consisted of residential streets and familiar paths used by students. Searches were conducted in places where someone might have wandered or become disoriented. These efforts did not produce evidence explaining Kristin's disappearance. Physical evidence was limited from the outset. There was no confirmed crime scene. There were no signs of a struggle discovered in the areas searched. Kristin's personal belongings remained behind, suggesting she had not planned to leave campus. This absence of preparation narrowed the range of explanations, but did not provide direction. As days passed, the investigation expanded slightly, but remained focused on the immediate surroundings. Officers continued to speak with students and review statements. Small discrepancies in recollections were noted, but they did not alter the central structure of the timeline. Kristin left the party. She walked toward campus. Paul Flores was with her during the final portion of that walk. She was not seen again. This clarity, paradoxically, made the investigation more difficult. With a defined last sighting and no evidence beyond it, there were few tangible leads to pursue. The case did not present multiple locations or extended travel routes. It presented a single short path that ended without explanation. Public awareness grew quickly. Kristin's disappearance was unsettling, not only because she was missing, but because of how and where it happened. Parents of other students paid close attention. Media coverage reflected the shock of a disappearance occurring during a routine activity in a college town considered safe. Search efforts intensified in response to this concern. Volunteers joined law enforcement in looking through nearby areas. Flyers were distributed. The campus community became involved, both out of concern for Kristin and out of unease about the implications of her disappearance. Despite these efforts, no new information emerged. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation began to shift in tone. What had started as an urgent search became a longer inquiry marked by uncertainty. Without evidence pointing clearly in one direction, investigators had to consider multiple possibilities. Early in the process, law enforcement explored whether Kristin might have left voluntarily. This line of inquiry was driven by the lack of physical evidence indicating harm. However, it conflicted with known facts. Kristin had left behind belongings. She had made no arrangements to leave. She had not contacted anyone. Over time, this theory lost strength. Another possibility considered was accidental harm. Investigators examined whether Kristin could have fallen or become injured while walking. Searches of surrounding terrain did not support this explanation. The area did not present obvious hazards that would account for a disappearance without trace. Throughout these early stages, Paul Flores remained a point of focus due to his position in the timeline. Being the last known person with Kristin placed him at the center of investigative attention. Interviews and follow-up questions reflected this focus. At the same time, the lack of physical evidence limited the actions investigators could take. This tension defined the initial investigation. There was a clear gap in the timeline, but no clear method for closing it. The case relied heavily on witness memory, which can fade or shift even over short periods. Investigators documented statements carefully, knowing they would form the foundation of any future developments. The community response continued to shape the investigation. Public interest kept pressure on law enforcement to pursue answers. Kristin's family became visible advocates, urging continued attention and thoroughness. Their involvement helped prevent the case from fading quickly from public view. As the investigation progressed, it became apparent that immediate resolution was unlikely. The absence of evidence did not resolve the case. It froze it in place. Each day that passed without new information reinforced the reality that the disappearance had moved beyond a short-term mystery. Law enforcement continued to revisit the initial hours, reviewing statements and considering alternative interpretations. However, the core facts did not change. The night of the disappearance remained fixed with the same unanswered questions. By the time weeks had passed, the investigation had entered a new phase. It was no longer a matter of locating a missing student quickly. It was a matter of understanding how someone could vanish during a short walk without leaving evidence behind. This shift marked the beginning of the case's long trajectory. The initial investigation laid the groundwork for everything that followed, establishing the timeline, identifying key individuals, and defining the central gap that would persist for decades. The early days did not provide answers, but they shaped the case's boundaries. They determined what was known, and just as importantly, what was not. Those boundaries would remain largely intact as years passed and the case moved into a different category. The investigation did not fail because of inaction. It stalled because the facts available did not lead forward. Kristin Smart's disappearance resisted resolution from the very beginning, defined by clarity up to a point and silence beyond it. As the initial investigation stalled, attention gradually shifted toward explanations that could account for Kristin Smart's disappearance without clear evidence of violence, and these explanations shaped the next phase of the case. When a person vanishes without leaving physical evidence, investigators are often forced to consider possibilities that conflict with initial expectations. In Kristin's case, one of the earliest alternative explanations explored was voluntary disappearance. This theory did not arise from evidence suggesting she wanted to leave, but from the absence of evidence pointing elsewhere. Without a crime scene, investigators had to examine whether she could have chosen to go somewhere on her own. This line of thinking required careful comparison with what was known about Kristin's life. She had left personal belongings behind. She had not packed clothing or essentials. She had not informed friends or family of any plans to leave campus. There were no financial records, communications, or confirmed sightings indicating she traveled beyond the area. Over time, these facts made voluntary disappearance increasingly difficult to support. The theory did not align with her established routines or her pattern of staying in contact with family. Another possibility considered was accidental harm. Investigators examined whether Kristin could have wandered off route due to intoxication and suffered an injury. Searches focused on nearby terrain and areas where a person might fall or become trapped. These searches did not uncover evidence consistent with such an accident. The environment between the party location and campus did not present hazards that would reasonably explain a disappearance without trace. These early explanations shared a common limitation. They attempted to move the narrative away from the final walk by introducing alternate outcomes that would explain the absence without addressing the gap in the timeline. As each possibility was examined, it returned investigators to the same point. Kristin was last seen walking toward campus with Paul Flores. Nothing beyond that moment could be verified. Despite this, time and resources were spent evaluating these alternatives. This was not due to negligence, but necessity. Without physical evidence, investigators had to exhaust every reasonable explanation. Each theory required confirmation or elimination. This process took time, and during that time, the case lost momentum. The effect of these detours was subtle but significant. As investigators explored possibilities that did not involve criminal action, the urgency associated with the case softened. The disappearance remained troubling, but it became framed as unresolved rather than actively unfolding. This shift influenced how often the case was revisited and how much attention it received. Public perception was also shaped by these theories. In the absence of clear information, speculation filled gaps. Some wondered whether Kristin might reappear. Others assumed the lack of evidence meant the case would remain unsolved. These assumptions did not come from facts, but from uncertainty. Throughout this period, Paul Flores remained a figure connected to the timeline. Being the last known person with Kristin placed him in a consistent position within the case, even as theories shifted around him. This fact did not disappear when alternate explanations were considered. It remained fixed, quietly resisting attempts to move the focus elsewhere. The walk home began to take on a different role during this phase. Instead of being treated as a moment requiring explanation, it was sometimes treated as a boundary beyond which answers might not exist. This subtle shift marked an important change. The walk was no longer always viewed as the point of failure, but as the end of what could be known. That framing affected how the case was discussed. Without new evidence, the narrative stalled. The same facts were repeated. Kristin attended a party. She left around 2 in the morning. She walked toward campus. She did not arrive. Over time, repetition without progress dulled attention. However, the false leads did not fully obscure the core issue. Each theory eventually collapsed under the weight of known facts. Voluntary disappearance did not explain abandoned belongings. Accident did not explain the absence of physical evidence. Miscommunication did not explain the length of time without contact. Each explanation reached a dead end. These dead ends are an important part of the case's history. They illustrate how investigations can be slowed not by error, but by the limitations of available information. Investigators cannot leap to conclusions without evidence. When evidence is missing, exploration becomes cautious and broad. As years passed, these early theories became part of the case's background. They were revisited and re-examined, not because they gained new support, but because unresolved cases often cycle through earlier ideas. Each return reinforced the conclusion that none of the false leads provided answers. For Kristin's family, this period was particularly difficult. Without resolution, they lived with uncertainty. Each theory raised and then removed hope. Each explanation that failed returned them to the same unanswered question. Advocacy became their primary tool for keeping the case alive. The community's attention also fluctuated. Initial concern faded as no new information emerged. Anniversaries brought temporary focus. Media coverage appeared and receded. The case remained present, but often in the background. The golden thread of the case, the short walk home, began to reassert itself as these false leads fell away. It was not dramatic. It did not announce its importance loudly. It simply remained unchanged. No theory could bypass it. No explanation could move beyond it without accounting for it. This realization marked a turning point in how the case would eventually be approached. Instead of looking outward for answers, investigators would later return inward, toward the original timeline. But during this chapter of the case, that return had not yet fully occurred. False leads do not always arise from misdirection. Sometimes they arise from absence. In Kristin Smart's case, the absence of evidence created space for alternatives that seemed reasonable at first glance. Over time, that space narrowed. Theories that once appeared plausible were quietly set aside. They did not end with dramatic announcements or clear resolutions. They ended through lack of support. The case did not pivot suddenly, it settled. This settling defined the middle years of the investigation. The disappearance was no longer new. The questions were familiar, the leads were exhausted. What remained was the original gap and the knowledge that it had never been filled. The walk home remained unresolved. not as a dramatic mystery, but as a factual problem that resisted explanation. It was the one element no theory could remove. As investigators moved forward, the case carried the weight of these failed explanations. They shaped future approaches by narrowing focus. They also shaped expectations. Resolution would not come easily. It would require something new, not another variation on an old idea. The false leads did not solve the case, but they clarified its boundaries. They defined what the disappearance was not. In doing so, they preserved the integrity of what was known. By the end of this phase, the investigation stood at a quiet standstill. Not because effort had ceased, but because all available paths had been walked. The unanswered walk remained. As the years passed without resolution, Kristin Smart's disappearance settled into a different kind of presence, one defined less by immediate urgency and more by persistence. After the early phases of investigation slowed, the case entered what is commonly described as a cold period. This shift did not mean the case was closed or forgotten by authorities, but it did mean that active investigative steps became less frequent. Without new evidence or witnesses coming forward, there were few clear paths to pursue. The known facts remained the same, and the unanswered questions stayed fixed around the final walk home. Time moved forward in visible ways. New students arrived at Cal Poly, unaware at first of the case that had once shaken the campus. Others learned about it gradually, often through quiet warnings passed along by peers or mentions during orientation. For long-term residents of San Luis Obispo, Kristin's name became part of the town's collective memory, resurfacing during anniversaries or moments of renewed attention. For Kristin's family, time did not soften the absence. Instead, it reshaped their role. In the absence of answers, advocacy became their way of sustaining the case. They remained visible, reminding the public and law enforcement that Kristin was still missing, and that the circumstances of her disappearance had never been explained. Their efforts ensured that the case did not disappear into archives entirely. Media attention followed a pattern common to long unresolved cases. Periods of silence were interrupted by renewed coverage tied to milestones. Anniversaries of Kristin's disappearance brought brief waves of attention. Articles revisited the timeline. Broadcast segments summarized what was known. Each return to the story followed the same structure because the facts had not changed. The cold case years were marked by repetition rather than discovery. Investigators revisited old statements. They reviewed earlier conclusions. Advances in technology created moments of cautious optimism, but progress was incremental. There was no single development that transformed the case during this period. Instead, there was a slow accumulation of context. Community memory fluctuated. For some, Kristin's disappearance remained vivid, a reminder of vulnerability within a place that otherwise felt safe. For others, especially those who arrived years later, the case existed as a historical reference rather than a lived experience. This uneven awareness affected how often the case was discussed and how strongly it was felt. Law enforcement periodically revisited the investigation. These efforts were shaped by changes in personnel, resources, and methods. New investigators brought fresh perspectives, but they worked within the same factual boundaries established in the first days. The timeline did not expand. The last confirmed sighting did not move. The lack of resolution influenced how the case was framed publicly. It was no longer described as an active search, but as an unresolved disappearance. This language carried weight. It acknowledged the absence of answers while also signaling the difficulty of obtaining them. Over time, the case became an example of how disappearances can linger without closure. Despite this, the case never fully faded. Kristin's family ensured that it remained present in public discourse. They participated in interviews. They marked anniversaries. They kept attention focused on the unanswered questions, rather than allowing speculation to redefine the narrative. Their consistency provided continuity in a story otherwise marked by long gaps. Technological advances during these years changed expectations around cold cases more broadly. Developments in forensic analysis and investigative techniques raised the possibility that older cases might yield new information. Kristin's case was revisited in this context, not because new evidence had emerged, but because new tools existed. These revisits were careful and methodical. The cold case period also altered how the disappearance was understood emotionally. The initial shock gave way to a quieter form of unease. The idea that someone could vanish during a short walk and remain missing for years became a persistent background concern rather than an acute fear. This shift did not reduce the seriousness of the case, but it changed how it was carried. For those closest to Kristin, time introduced new layers of loss. Milestones passed without her. The absence became woven into everyday life. Advocacy was not only about finding answers, but about maintaining Kristin's presence in public memory. The case was not allowed to become abstract. Throughout these years, the central facts remained unchanged. Kristin attended a party. She left around 2 in the morning. She walked toward campus. Paul Flores was with her during the final portion of that walk. She did not arrive at her dorm. No confirmed sightings followed. These facts were repeated because they were all that could be confirmed. The repetition itself became part of the case's character. Each retelling reinforced how little had changed. Each anniversary underscored the passage of time rather than progress. The cold case years were defined by endurance rather than movement. Investigators and the public alike faced the same limitation. Without new information, speculation could not be replaced by evidence. The case resisted narrative expansion. It did not branch into multiple locations or suspects. It remained narrow, focused on a single night and a single gap. This narrowness preserved the integrity of the case, but also contributed to its stagnation. There were no new leads to chase. No new witnesses came forward in ways that altered the timeline. The absence of change became the defining feature of the period. Even so, the case remained open. Law enforcement did not declare it unsolvable. Files were maintained. Information was reviewed. The possibility of future developments was not dismissed. This open status mattered, both practically and symbolically. Public interest, though intermittent, never disappeared entirely. Kristin Smart's name continued to appear in discussions about campus safety and missing persons. The case served as a reminder that unresolved disappearances do not resolve themselves with time. The cold case years were not marked by dramatic moments, but by continuity. The same questions were asked. The same answers were given. The same silence followed. This cycle defined the long middle stretch of the investigation. For Kristin's family, hope did not disappear, but it changed form. It became quieter and more patient. It was no longer tied to immediate outcomes, but to the belief that accountability could still emerge, even after many years. This period laid the groundwork for what would eventually come next. While it did not produce answers, it preserved the case in a state where answers remained possible. The files were intact, the facts were documented. The narrative had not been overtaken by speculation. The cold case years demonstrate how time can slow an investigation without ending it. They show how absence can persist without resolution. They also show how persistence, even without visible progress, can keep a case alive. By the end of this long phase, Kristin Smart's disappearance had become one of the most well-known unresolved cases associated with a college campus. Its longevity was not due to complexity, but to the opposite. It remained unresolved because it was simple in structure and empty at its center. The walk home, which had defined the beginning, continued to define the middle. It remained unanswered, unchanged, and central. When renewed attention returned to Kristin Smart's case, it did not arrive as a single dramatic revelation, but as a gradual narrowing of focus shaped by years of accumulated context. By the time investigators re-examined the case in depth, the timeline was already firmly established. Kristin had attended an off-campus party during Memorial Day weekend in 1996. She left around 2 in the morning. She appeared intoxicated and was assisted while walking toward campus. Paul Flores was with her during the final portion of that walk. She never arrived at her dorm. No confirmed sightings followed. These facts had not changed in decades. What changed was how they were approached. The renewed investigation was built on the understanding that earlier efforts had not failed through lack of attention, but through lack of evidence. With advances in investigative methods and a willingness to revisit earlier conclusions, law enforcement began to re-examine the case from the beginning. This process involved reviewing witness statements, reassessing timelines, and looking again at information that had long been part of the record. The focus returned, once again, to the last confirmed point in Kristin's movements. The short walk home around 2 in the morning had always been central. Now it became unavoidable. Any explanation had to account for what happened after that moment, and why Kristin left no trace beyond it. Paul Flores, who had been identified early as the last person known to be with Kristin, remained central to this renewed scrutiny. His presence in the timeline had never been disputed. What changed was the willingness to pursue the implications of that fact through legal channels, even after so much time had passed. The renewed investigation did not rely on a sudden confession or a single piece of evidence. Instead, it involved reanalysis. Investigators reviewed existing materials with fresh eyes, considering how pieces that once seemed insufficient might fit together when examined collectively. The passage of time did not erase the timeline. It clarified its rigidity. Legal proceedings followed this renewed focus. Paul Flores was arrested and charged in connection with Kristin Smart's death. Separately, his father, Ruben Flores, was charged with assisting after the fact. These developments marked the first time the case moved fully into the courtroom after decades of uncertainty. The trials brought renewed public attention. For many, the case had become a symbol of unresolved loss. The legal process reframed it as a question of accountability rather than mystery. Court proceedings are structured and deliberate, emphasizing evidence and standards of proof rather than speculation. This structure imposed a different rhythm on the case. During the trial of Paul Flores, prosecutors presented a theory of the case based on the accumulated facts and their interpretation. This theory centered on the events following the final walk home. It did not rely on dramatic narrative devices. It relied on timelines, witness statements, and the argument that the last known interaction mattered. Ruben Flores was tried separately. The charges against him reflected a different allegation, that he had assisted after the fact. The distinction between the two cases was significant. It underscored the complexity of assigning responsibility decades after an event and the necessity of evaluating each charge independently. In 1996, Kristin's disappearance had been defined by absence. In the courtroom, it was defined by evidence. That shift did not fill every gap, but it altered the frame. The question was no longer only what might have happened, but what could be proven. In 2022, the jury reached a verdict. Paul Flores was convicted of the murder of Kristin Smart. Ruben Flores was acquitted of the charge brought against him. These outcomes reflected the specific evidence presented and the legal thresholds required for conviction. The conviction of Paul Flores marked a turning point in the case. After approximately 26 years, there was a legal determination assigning responsibility for Kristin's death. This did not provide every answer. It did not reconstruct the night in detail. It did not recover what was lost. But it altered the case's status from unresolved to adjudicated. The golden thread of the case, the short walk home around 2 in the morning, returned in a different form during this phase. It was no longer only the point of disappearance. It became the anchor of accountability. The final walk was no longer just the place where answers stopped. It was the place where responsibility was fixed. For Kristin's family, the verdict represented a form of resolution shaped by endurance. They had lived with uncertainty for decades. The conviction did not erase that time, but it acknowledged it. It affirmed that the disappearance had not been an accident or a voluntary absence. It recognized it as a crime. The community's response reflected a mix of gravity and restraint. The case had been part of San Luis Obispo's history for many years. The verdict did not bring celebration. It brought recognition. Recognition of what had happened and recognition of how long it had taken to reach that point. The renewed investigation also highlighted the importance of persistence in long-running cases. The facts of Kristin's disappearance had been present since the beginning. What changed was the willingness and ability to act on them through a legal process years later. This did not suggest that answers were easy. It suggested that time does not always erase the possibility of accountability. The dual timeline structure of the case became especially clear at this stage. On one track, there was the night of May 24th into May 25th, 1996. On the other, there were the years that followed, leading to arrest, trial, and conviction. These timelines did not converge neatly. They intersected across decades. The vanishing point, the moment where Kristin's movements ended, remained fixed. The trial did not alter that moment. It contextualized it. It framed it within a broader narrative that extended beyond disappearance into consequence. The legal resolution did not answer every question the public had carried. There were details that remained unclear. There were moments that could not be reconstructed with certainty. The conviction did not claim to provide a complete picture. It provided a judgment based on the evidence available. This distinction is important. True crime narratives often emphasize revelation. In this case, the outcome emphasized process. It demonstrated how accountability can emerge slowly, through sustained attention rather than sudden discovery. For investigators, the conviction validated the decision to revisit the case. It showed that earlier limitations did not define the case's future. For families affected by long unresolved disappearances, it offered a reminder that time alone does not close cases. Kristin Smart's disappearance had been discussed for years as a mystery. After the conviction, it was discussed as a crime that had finally been addressed. This shift altered how the case would be remembered. It moved from the category of unanswered questions into the category of delayed justice. The final walk home, which had once been the boundary of knowledge, became the boundary of accountability. It was the point beyond which Kristin was never seen again, and the point upon which the legal case rested. The walk did not change, its meaning did. In the courtroom, years of repetition gave way to judgment. The same facts that had been stated countless times were now weighed under a different standard. The outcome reflected that weighing, not a sudden discovery. The acquittal of Ruben Flores also underscored the limits of the process. It demonstrated that not every suspicion leads to conviction, and that each charge must stand on its own evidence. The case did not resolve by sweeping away uncertainty entirely. It resolved by drawing lines. As the legal process concluded, the case entered its final phase. The investigation that had begun with a missing person report ended with a conviction decades later. This arc did not erase the years in between, it encompassed them. The renewed investigation and trial closed one chapter of the case, but they did not close its emotional impact. For Kristin's family and community, the verdict marked an end to one form of waiting and the beginning of reflection. The case no longer asked what might have happened. It stated what had been determined. It did not claim completeness. It claimed responsibility. The long gap between disappearance and conviction remains a defining feature of the case. It illustrates how justice can be delayed without being abandoned. It also illustrates the cost of that delay. Kristin Smart's name is now associated not only with a disappearance, but with a legal resolution that took more than 2 decades to achieve. This outcome does not simplify the story. It completes it in a limited but meaningful way. The renewed investigation did not rewrite the past. It acknowledged it. It took the same facts that had resisted explanation and placed them within a framework of accountability. The walk home around 2 in the morning, once an unanswered endpoint, became the point from which responsibility was finally traced. In the years after Kristin Smart disappeared, silence became one of the defining features of the case, and even after legal resolution, that silence never fully lifted. By the time the courtroom phase concluded, Kristin's name had been spoken publicly for more than 2 decades. It had been repeated in news articles, interviews, court filings, and quiet conversations among those who remembered the night she never returned home. The conviction brought an official conclusion to the legal question of responsibility, but it did not undo the absence that had shaped so many lives. Kristin was 19 years old when she disappeared. She was a college student living in a town that felt familiar and navigable. The short walk home she began in the early morning hours of May 25, 1996, was not extraordinary. It was routine. That normalcy is what made the case endure. Nothing about the moment signaled danger in advance. There was no warning embedded in the timeline. For Kristin's family, the years between her disappearance and the conviction were marked by waiting without clarity. They lived with unanswered questions for most of their adult lives. Advocacy became a constant presence, not because it offered certainty, but because it kept the case from dissolving into obscurity. Their persistence did not change the facts of the night. It preserved them. The legal resolution acknowledged what the family had long asserted, that Kristin's disappearance was not voluntary and not an accident. It affirmed that a crime had occurred. This recognition mattered. It reframed the narrative from one of mystery to one of accountability. Still, accountability has limits. It does not restore what was lost. It does not fill in every missing moment. The case also left a lasting imprint on the community of San Luis Obispo. For years, it functioned as a quiet reference point, a reminder that safety could not be assumed simply because a place felt familiar. The disappearance influenced conversations about campus safety and awareness, not through fear, but through memory. As new generations of students arrived, Kristin's story was often introduced not as a current event, but as part of the town's history. This shift altered how the case was understood. It became something inherited rather than experienced directly. Yet the underlying facts remained unchanged, anchoring the story in a specific night and a specific absence. The dual timeline of the case never truly collapsed into one. The night of the disappearance and the years that followed remained separate, connected only by the persistence of unanswered questions and the eventual legal process. The conviction bridged those timelines in a limited way, but it did not merge them. The vanishing point of the case remained fixed. Kristin left a party around 2 in the morning. She walked toward campus. Paul Flores was with her during the final portion of that walk. She did not arrive at her dorm. No confirmed sightings followed. Everything else unfolded around that gap. Even with the verdict, there were elements that could never be fully reconstructed. The exact sequence of events after the final sighting remains unknown to the public. The case does not offer a complete narrative arc. It offers a boundary, a place where knowledge ends and inference begins. The legal process addressed responsibility, not every detail. This distinction is important when reflecting on the case. True crime stories often promise answers. Kristin Smart's case provides a form of resolution, but it does not resolve every curiosity. It asks listeners to accept that some truths remain inaccessible, even when justice is pursued. The quiet nature of the case's conclusion mirrors the quiet nature of its beginning. There was no dramatic confrontation in the early hours of that morning. There was no public alarm until Kristin failed to return. Likewise, there was no celebratory closure at the end. There was acknowledgement. There was gravity. For Kristin's family, the end of the trial did not mark the end of grief. It marked the end of uncertainty about one question. The absence remained. The years could not be reclaimed. What changed was the recognition that the disappearance had been taken seriously by the system, even if that recognition came late. The case also stands as an example of how time interacts with justice. Delays do not necessarily erase responsibility, but they do shape its impact. Accountability after decades carries a different weight than accountability after days or months. It is quieter. It is heavier. Kristin's story continues to be told not because it contains shocking twists, but because it reflects a reality that many families face. Disappearances can remain unresolved for years. Answers can arrive slowly or incompletely. Advocacy can sustain attention when evidence alone cannot. The golden thread of the case, the short walk home, remains the simplest and most unsettling element. It was not a long journey. It did not cross unfamiliar terrain. It should have ended safely. That it did not is the core truth that the case circles, even after resolution. In reflecting on Kristin's life, it is important to remember that she was more than the circumstances of her disappearance. She was a student, a daughter, and a presence in the lives of those who knew her. The case often reduces her to a timeline. Reflection restores her humanity without speculation. The long arc of the investigation shows how cases can evolve without changing their foundation. The facts known in the first days were still the facts considered decades later. What changed was the context around them, the willingness to act, and the tools available to do so. The community's relationship with the case has also evolved. What began as fear became vigilance. What became silence turned into memory. The case now occupies a space between warning and remembrance, neither dominating daily life nor disappearing from it. Kristin Smart's disappearance did not end with her being found. It ended with a legal determination that acknowledged her absence as a crime. This outcome does not satisfy every emotional need. It does not answer every question. It provides a boundary where speculation gives way to judgment. For listeners, the case invites reflection rather than suspense. It asks what it means to live with unanswered questions, and what it means when some of those questions are finally addressed. It also asks how communities remember those who vanish without trace. The story does not conclude with certainty. It concludes with recognition. Recognition of Kristin. Recognition of the years that passed. Recognition of the cost of waiting. The final walk home remains central, not because it is dramatic, but because it is ordinary. It reminds us that harm does not always announce itself. It can occur within routines, within familiarity, within moments that feel unremarkable until they are gone. In the end, Kristin Smart's case stands as a record of persistence. Persistence by a family who refused to let the case fade. Persistence by investigators who returned to the facts after years of stagnation. Persistence by a community that carried the memory forward. The absence at the center of the story cannot be filled. It can only be acknowledged. Kristin Smart left a party in the early hours of a holiday weekend. She walked toward home. She did not arrive. Decades later, the system recognized that truth as a crime. That recognition does not bring her back. It brings clarity to one question and leaves others untouched. The quiet closure of the case reflects the quiet nature of its beginning. There is no final revelation, only an understanding shaped by time. What remains is Kristin's name, her story, and the knowledge that even ordinary moments can carry lasting consequences.